It was a crisp Monday morning when I first noticed something was off about my garage, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. I had just stepped outside with a steaming mug of black coffee, ready to enjoy the stillness that came with living on the edge of a pine-lined cul-de-sac just outside the jurisdiction of Oak Ridge Estates HOA, which was run more like a dictatorship than a neighborhood association. I had purposely bought my property just beyond their control, a house with acreage, an old garage detached from the main house, and all the independence a man could want. The place wasn't fancy, but it was mine to maintain, mine to leave alone, and most importantly, mine to keep free from the iron-fisted nonsense of HOA bureaucrats. So when I walked around back and found the old roll-up door to my garage propped halfway open, I immediately felt that slow burn of something being wrong. The gravel underfoot crunched as I stepped closer, my mind already racing through possibilities. Maybe an animal had gotten inside, maybe a neighbor's kid was poking around, maybe a branch had knocked something loose. But none of those theories held water once I laid eyes on the scene inside. There, sitting squarely in the middle of my garage like it belonged there, was a gleaming, black Cadillac Escalade with vanity plates that read, KR3N1. I stared, dumbfounded, the absurdity of the moment freezing me in place. It wasn't just that someone had parked in my garage, it was the audacity of it being such a conspicuously entitled vehicle, parked dead center in a space that hadn't hosted anything fancier than an old riding mower in over a decade. My garage was no showroom. It was a dusty, concrete-floored space filled with half-forgotten tools, shelves of paint cans, and enough spiderwebs to qualify as a Halloween prop. And yet, there it was. An Escalade, spotless and smug-looking, somehow both luxurious and invasive. I approached the vehicle, cautious but irritated, and peeked through the tinted glass. Empty. No note, no sign of someone meaning to come back shortly. Just silence. I circled the SUV once, taking it all in, custom wheels, a pair of obnoxiously large pink fuzzy dice hanging from the mirror, and on the rear bumper, a sticker that read, HOA Pride Oak Ridge Strong. My gut clenched. I knew exactly whose car this was. Karen Mayfield, president for life of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA, thorn in the side of anyone who dared to plant a flower bed without pre-approval. I had crossed paths with her once before, back when I moved in 2 years ago. She had driven by, pulled to the curb, and lectured me through her window about respecting the aesthetic consistency of the community, even though my house wasn't part of her domain. I'd laughed her off and gone about my business, assuming that was the end of it. But this was next-level crazy. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos, documenting every angle of the intrusion. I didn't know yet what I was going to do, but I knew I'd need evidence. After a few more minutes of stunned disbelief, I walked back to the house, looked up the HOA's number, and called their office. A bored-sounding receptionist picked up, and when I explained the situation, her tone changed instantly. "Oh, that's Karen's car," she said with forced brightness. "I believe she mentioned something about needing temporary storage. Isn't your garage the one that looks kind of abandoned?" I nearly choked. "Excuse me? That's my private garage on my private land. No one asked permission, and no one has a right to park there." The receptionist made a non-committal hum. "Well, if it's not under HOA jurisdiction, I suppose that's between you and Karen." I hung up, fuming. 10 minutes later, I was knocking on Karen's door. Her house was a pristine monstrosity of beige stucco and symmetrical landscaping. Every hedge trimmed to within an inch of its life, every blade of grass trembling under the weight of conformity. She answered the door wearing a pressed blouse, a Bluetooth headset, and an expression of condescension that could sour milk. "Oh," she said with a tight smile, "you must be the gentleman from the garage property." "I am," I replied evenly. "And your car is parked in my garage without permission." She blinked as if confused by the concept. "Yes, I saw it was empty and figured no one was using it. It's practically an eyesore. Honestly, I'm doing you a favor by keeping that lovely vehicle there. Raises the property value just by being seen." I stared at her, struggling to comprehend her nerve. "You broke into my garage." "I didn't break in," she sniffed. "The door was unlocked. And besides, community spaces should be shared." Your land is adjacent to Oak Ridge, and you benefit from our neighborhood's appeal. It's only fair. That garage isn't part of your community. It's not a shared space. It's mine. Her expression turned smug. Well, I've spoken to the board, and we're considering a motion to annex the bordering properties. Yours would fall under our regulations, and frankly, it's about time someone held you to a higher standard. That garage has been an eyesore for years. I stepped back, reeling. Move your car. Today. Her smile widened. Or what? You'll tow it? That would be theft. The HOA would fine you, and frankly, we have more legal muscle than you'd be able to handle. Be a good neighbor and let me keep it there for a few days. I'm renovating my garage and needed a clean space. She closed the door in my face. I stood on her porch, stunned, for several seconds before walking back home. Couldn't believe it. Not only had she invaded my property, but she was also weaponizing her HOA like some kind of personal mafia. I called the sheriff's department to report the trespass, but the deputy who came out shrugged helplessly. It's murky, he admitted. Technically it's your property and the car shouldn't be there, but since the garage was unlocked and there's no sign of forced entry or criminal intent, it's a civil matter. You'd have to file in small claims or get a court order to have it removed. So I can't tow it? Not unless you go through the formal process, or she agrees to move it. That night I barely slept. My garage, my sanctuary, had been invaded. The next morning, I decided to do something about it. I posted signs, bright red, bold font, on the garage exterior, private property. No trespassing. Vehicles will be towed. I sent Karen a certified letter demanding the removal of her vehicle. I even reached out to a local attorney who confirmed what I feared. Unless I could prove the car had been abandoned or was causing a danger, I was stuck in legal limbo. Over the next week, I documented everything. I installed cameras. I recorded every interaction. I even caught Karen sneaking over one night to check on the SUV. She waved at the camera and blew a kiss. It was maddening. She was taunting me, confident in her imagined impunity. But what she didn't know was that I had started digging through local ordinances and state codes. I found a clause that defined a vehicle parked without consent on private property for over 72 hours as unauthorized and subject to removal, provided the property owner had posted signage and made reasonable attempts to contact the owner. I had receipts, I had photos, I had timestamps. All I needed now was to let the clock run out. On the morning of the fourth day, I made the call to a licensed towing and salvage yard. I explained the situation, sent over the documentation, and scheduled the pickup. The operator on the other end laughed and said, "You're not the first to call about HOA craziness. We'll take care of it." As I hung up the phone, a slow grin crept across my face. Karen had made one fatal mistake. She underestimated how far I'd go to defend my property, and how thorough I could be when pushed. That night, I dreamed of the garage empty again, free and clean, a place of peace once more. What I didn't know was that the real chaos hadn't even begun yet. That would come the next morning, when Karen showed up to find her beloved Escalade gone. The morning after the Escalade vanished from my garage, I stood on my porch sipping coffee, waiting for the inevitable detonation. It didn't take long. At exactly 8:13 a.m., the air was split by a furious screech as Karen Mayfield's voice echoed down the cul-de-sac, her designer heels crunching furiously over gravel as she charged toward my house. Fists clenched at her sides and face flushed red enough to match a hazard light. I had prepared for this moment the night before, laying out every legal document, photo, and ordinance code I had meticulously assembled to justify the removal of her vehicle from my property. Still, her fury was nuclear. She didn't even knock, just stood at the foot of my porch and let loose. "Where's my SUV, you petty, vindictive lunatic?" she bellowed, gesturing wildly like a soap opera villain. I calmly took a sip of my coffee. "You mean the illegally parked Escalade that was left on private property for 4 days? It's been removed, towed and sold to a scrapyard." Karen's face twisted into a mask of disbelief, horror, and indignation. "You had no right. That was a luxury vehicle. Do you know how much that cost? You'll be hearing from my lawyer." "Good," I said, setting my cup down and holding up the certified letter I'd mailed her 3 days earlier. Because I kept everything. Here's a copy of the notice you ignored. And here's the city ordinance code on abandoned vehicles on private land. The garage is mine. You had 72 hours. You ignored the deadline. She snatched the papers from my hand, her eyes scanning them with increasing frustration. This isn't over, she hissed, practically shaking. You want a war? You've got one. Then she turned and stormed off, muttering to herself, her heels stabbing divots into my driveway with every step. I knew she'd retaliate, but I underestimated just how far she was willing to go. The next day, I received a bright orange notice taped to my front door. It was a courtesy warning from the Oak Ridge Estates HOA, citing me for excessive visual pollution, non-standard architectural aesthetics, and failure to comply with community uniformity guidelines. I wasn't part of the HOA. My property line, clearly demarcated and legally recorded, fell outside their jurisdiction. Yet there it was, an official-looking document with Karen's signature at the bottom and the HOA letterhead emblazoned in gold. I crumpled it up, marched over to the HOA office 2 streets over, and demanded an explanation. The receptionist, the same one from before, smiled sheepishly. Karen said there's a new motion to annex properties bordering Oak Ridge. You'll be grandfathered in and expected to comply with the HOA rules. That's not how any of this works, I said, incredulous. You can't just annex private property like you're running an empire. There's no vote, no notice. You have 0 jurisdiction over my land. She shrugged. I just work the desk. I left the office seething, only to find a second notice taped to my mailbox that afternoon. This one a first fine notice for violating landscaping uniformity standards. According to the paper, my front yard, home to 2 beautiful maple trees and a garden of native plants, was non-compliant due to overgrowth, despite being trimmed weekly. The paper threatened daily fines of $250. I took it straight to the county zoning office. The woman behind the desk took one look at the HOA letter and burst out laughing. They don't govern your lot, she said, still chuckling. They'd need a petition, unanimous board approval, and legal annexation documentation filed with the county. And even then, you'd have to sign off. This is just intimidation. Encouraged, I filed a formal complaint with the county for HOA harassment and unauthorized enforcement attempts. I sent a copy of the filing to Karen. She responded not with an apology but with more escalation. That weekend, a truck pulled up to my house and began unloading pallets of sod and landscaping materials onto my front lawn. I came outside, baffled, and the foreman handed me a clipboard. Delivery for yard renovation. HOA order. Cancel it, I said immediately. Wrong address, and the HOA has no control here. The man looked confused but didn't argue. As he packed up, I spotted Karen standing across the street in her front yard, arms crossed, watching like a hawk. When our eyes met, she smirked and held up her phone, clearly recording. The next day, I found my trash bins emptied out and spread across my driveway. Banana peels, eggshells, soda cans all scattered as if by a raccoon with an agenda. I checked my cameras. At 3:21 a.m., a shadowy figure in yoga pants and a hoodie crept onto my property and tipped them over. The resolution wasn't perfect, but the body language, the gait, it was unmistakably Karen. I printed the footage, highlighted the timestamps, and walked it over to the sheriff's office. Again, the deputy sighed. She's pushing boundaries, but unless you catch her in the act or she causes damage above a certain threshold, there's not much we can do. You could file for a restraining order if it continues. I began the paperwork that afternoon. Meanwhile, Karen kept upping the ante. She called in noise complaints every time I mowed the lawn. She reported my dog to animal control for barking, despite the fact I didn't own a dog. I received anonymous letters warning that nonconformity breeds decline, and suggesting I move to a trailer park where individualism is more accepted. I knew where they came from. I saved them all. I started building a file, a thick binder of evidence, harassment reports, fake citations, and legal notes. My lawyer, whom I had now retained officially, was incredulous. She's trying to annex you through harassment, he said. It's legally meaningless, but it's a siege tactic. She hopes you'll give in or move out. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. If anything, her relentless pettiness only strengthened my resolve. But I also realized that the high road, while noble, wasn't enough anymore. I needed to make a move that would end this, and not just legally but symbolically. I started researching deeper. I discovered that the HOA's annexation motion was a sham. No board vote had taken place, and most residents hadn't even been informed. Karen had simply drafted fake documents to intimidate. I contacted a few homeowners in Oak Ridge, explained the situation, and showed them the notices she sent me. They were shocked. She said your garage was on common land. One man told me. Said you were squatting there and abusing the system. Another neighbor added. Karen said you vandalized her vehicle. That you poured acid on the paint before it was towed. The lies were stacking like sandbags in a flood. But then came the crack I needed. A former HOA board member, an elderly gentleman named Tom Willis, reached out to me after hearing about the situation from a mutual acquaintance. Karen overstepped, he said, handing me a folder. Here's proof the board never voted on annexation. And here's the actual HOA map filed with the county. Your land? Nowhere near our boundaries. I thanked him, made copies, and sent a cease and desist letter to Karen's address. The next day, another notice appeared on my mailbox. This one handwritten in bold red marker. Fine. $1,000 for illegal vehicle disposal. Pay immediately or be reported. That was it. I took the folder from Tom, my own stack of evidence, and filed a formal lawsuit against Karen and the HOA for harassment, defamation, and attempted illegal annexation. The local news caught wind of it, especially after I submitted the camera footage of Karen sneaking onto my land at night. A reporter contacted me for an interview, and I laid out everything. How she parked her car in my garage without permission, how I followed the legal process to remove it, and how she spent the following weeks retaliating in increasingly irrational and illegal ways. The story aired 2 days later. Local man battles HOA tyrant. The headline read, with a photo of Karen's Escalade mid-tow and a blurry screenshot of her trespassing. The fallout was immediate. HOA residents flooded the board with complaints, demanding a vote to remove Karen. She responded by doubling down, accusing me of slander, techno-manipulation of the footage, and community destabilization. My lawyer just shook his head. She's unraveling. Keep your cool. Let the lawsuit do its work. But I wasn't finished yet. I was tired of playing defense. That weekend, I began remodeling the garage. I replaced the rotting roll-up door with a modern steel one that locked tight. I power washed the interior, cleaned out years of cobwebs and junk, and installed new lights. The space became something beautiful, a personal retreat, secure and private. And in the back corner, I hung a photo. A framed, glossy still of Karen's Escalade, caught mid-lift as the tow truck carried it away. I called it The Day Peace Returned. Karen, meanwhile, was now embroiled in internal HOA chaos. Residents had submitted enough votes to force a leadership review. The county had begun investigating the fraudulent citations she sent. My lawyer informed me that discovery requests would soon begin. But best of all, Karen had started to retreat. Her daily harassment had stopped. Her smug patrols through the neighborhood were gone. The latest rumor from a neighbor suggested she was taking a leave of absence while things settled. I didn't care if she stayed or left. She was no longer welcome on my land, and she knew it. The final nail came 1 week later, when I received a certified letter not from Karen, but from the HOA board. It was an official apology for the unlawful citations, a promise that my property was not and would never be part of their jurisdiction, and a statement that Karen Mayfield had been formally suspended pending litigation. I posted a copy on my garage door, just for a week, just to let it breathe in the sunshine. I had won the legal war, but I still felt something brewing inside. A sense that justice, while served by courts and lawyers, sometimes needed a little personal punctuation. And so I began planning something that would do more than defend my land. It would send a message Karen would never forget. The sun had barely begun to rise when I decided enough was enough. The moment I opened my garage door that morning and saw Karen's behemoth of a Cadillac Escalade still squatting in the center of my space like it owned the place, I realized she wasn't coming back for it anytime soon. It had been 4 full days since she arrogantly drove it into my garage during a brief lapse in my gate being open for landscaping delivery, and not once had she knocked on my door, called, or sent any notice of intent to retrieve it, nor had she acknowledged the very clear warning sign I had taped on the windshield that read, "This vehicle is trespassing and will be removed within 72 hours if not claimed." Instead, she strutted around the neighborhood as if she owned it all, smirking from across the cul-de-sac and whispering malicious little lies to neighbors about how I had invited her to park there, or that the property line was under dispute due to some imaginary HOA easement. It was typical Karen behavior. Trespass, lie, intimidate, and when called out, play the victim. But I wasn't playing her game. I had already done my homework. 3 days prior, I'd contacted the county's code enforcement department and filed a report about an abandoned vehicle on private property. They instructed me to post a 72-hour notice in a visible location and document the vehicle with photos and timestamps, which I had done meticulously, close-ups of the license plate, the make and model, the odometer reading visible through the windshield, the front end awkwardly jammed against my workbench. I even had surveillance footage of Karen parking it and walking away without so much as glancing at my door. When the 72-hour mark passed, precisely at 7:43 a.m., I made my next move. I contacted a local scrapyard that handled impound and disposal for private property owners, and after confirming with my lawyer that I had the legal right to remove and dispose of an abandoned vehicle on my property, I arranged for them to send a tow truck. By noon, the scrapyard's massive black flatbed truck rumbled down my driveway, the operator hopping out with a clipboard and a tired but friendly smile. "You the one with the Escalade in the garage?" he asked. "That's me," I replied, handing him the printed paperwork. The abandonment notice, photos, the code enforcement response, and the property deed clearly marking the garage as entirely within my boundary, outside the reach of any HOA claims. He gave it a quick glance, nodded and said, "All right then, let's get this thing out of your way." Watching that tow truck inch into my garage, back up with precise control, hook its chains around Karen's bloated luxury SUV, and begin the slow, satisfying process of winching it up onto the flatbed was nothing short of therapeutic. It groaned and creaked as if protesting its exile, but the hydraulics didn't care. Up it went inch by inch until the whole thing sat sideways, wheels locked and silent, ready for the scrapyard guillotine. The driver secured it with thick straps, signed the final form, and handed me a receipt and a check stub for the salvage value, $872.39. Not bad for a car that had cosmetic damage, worn tires, and a suspicious smell inside. "She's gonna be chopped by sundown," the driver chuckled as he climbed into the cab. "Hope whoever left it doesn't come crying later." "Oh, they will," I muttered, watching the truck disappear down the drive. And indeed they did. The following morning, just after sunrise, the peace was shattered by the shrill sound of screaming tires and louder screeching lungs. I was inside finishing my breakfast when I heard the doorbell ring. 3 fast jabs, then silence, then a sudden pounding of fists. I opened the door to see Karen Mayfield standing there in full meltdown mode, wearing oversized sunglasses, a Chanel scarf in her hair, and rage seething from every pore like smoke from a volcano. "Where's my SUV?" she shrieked, pushing past me into the foyer as if she had any right to do so. I stepped in front of her, blocking access to the hallway. "It's gone," I said calmly. "Removed as an abandoned vehicle. It was here illegally, and I followed the proper legal procedure to have it taken to a scrapyard." Her face contorted in a twisted mix of confusion and disbelief. "You're lying. You're lying. You had no right. That was a $60,000 vehicle. I was going to move it today." "You had 72 hours, Karen. I gave you notice. I even hand-delivered a copy of the ordinance on day 2 and taped a notice to your door." "I never saw anything," Karen screeched, though her eyes betrayed doubt. I handed her an envelope. "Here's everything: legal notice, photos, ordinance, proof the SUV was abandoned. And this," I handed her a check, "is what the scrapyard salvaged. $800. She exploded. You destroyed my Escalade for this? It was in my garage, left illegally. You have no case. Red-faced and shaking, she screamed, I'll ruin you. Police, HOA, county, everyone. They've all been informed, I said. The HOA has no jurisdiction here, remember? She stormed off. That day, my phone didn't stop. The sheriff's office said I was in the clear. 2 HOA board members emailed to distance themselves from her. Then I saw a man in a suit visit her, likely legal counsel. By the next morning, movers arrived. Karen flailed on her phone while her things were boxed up. Within 2 days, a for sale sign appeared. Neighbors brought casseroles and beer. You shut her down perfectly, one said. I hadn't done it for thanks. I did it to stop a bully who thought rules didn't apply to her. But it wasn't over. A week later, I received a lawsuit. Karen was suing me for $25,000, claiming theft and emotional distress. I laughed and called my attorney. This is bluff, he said, and we'll crush it. I responded with full documentation. Notice, footage, property deed, tow truck confirmation, everything. As the court date approached, the neighborhood turned against her. People shared horror stories, petty fines, threats, and power plays. Someone even had video of her bragging about teaching me a lesson. In court, Karen arrived dressed like a wannabe queen. Her lawyer tried to claim I acted recklessly. I calmly presented my binder of evidence. The judge listened, reviewed everything, and turned to Karen. You left your vehicle in his garage without permission for days and ignored written warnings? She stammered. Case dismissed. Defendant acted within legal rights. Plaintiff pays court costs. Outside, Karen stormed off. Days later, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. Residents filled the clubhouse, recounting their grievances. A vote was held, 42-2. Karen was removed as HOA president. She left the community quietly, her house under contract. In the following weeks, the neighborhood transformed. Kids played freely, gardens bloomed, neighbors smiled. The new HOA president visited me personally, apologized, and asked me to help rewrite policies. I agreed, because change begins when people stop tolerating tyranny, whether it's parked in their garage or sitting on the HOA board. Repainted the walls a clean white, laid down epoxy flooring, and installed brand new reinforced doors with an electronic keypad lock and motion sensors. I turned it into a workshop, a place of creation and reflection, where I could tinker with wood projects, sharpen tools, and unwind without a trace of Karen's SUV looming in the space. But the final touch, the crown jewel of that transformation, came in the form of a framed photograph I mounted above the workbench. A picture of the Escalade, perched on the back of the tow truck, the garage in the background, the setting sun casting long shadows across the driveway. Beneath it, I added a brass plaque that read, "This is what boundaries look like." It became a symbol not of revenge, but of resilience. Not of spite, but of standing firm. And every time I walked into that garage, flipped on the lights, and saw that photo, I was reminded of the importance of knowing your rights, respecting your space, and never letting anyone, HOA or otherwise, convince you that their entitlement trumps your ownership. Karen's reign was over. Her SUV was scrap metal. Her influence reduced to whispers of a cautionary tale parents told their kids when explaining why you don't mess with people's property. And me? I got my garage back, my peace of mind back, and more than that, I got to witness an entire community rediscover what it meant to live without fear of petty tyranny. That garage, once a battleground, had become a sanctuary. And as I stood there, wiping sawdust from my hands, admiring the quiet order of tools hanging on hooks and projects waiting to be built, I realized the most powerful freedom is the one you defend. Not with fists, but with patience, law, and the quiet resolve to say, "Not today, Karen.